Fellowship Farm, Book 5, A Pirate Cave. The Fitzgeralds of Fellowship Farm, together with their cousins from Sydney and their 3 adorable puppies, Flea, Flex and Fizz, are camping at Choppy's Point when they make a series of exciting discoveries. A secret cave, a pirate map, some buried secrets. Join them as they learn the truth about the pirates who visited Choppy's Point, leaving their treasure behind them. Chapter 1, Magic Mummy. As the sun rose higher in the sky over Choppy's Point and the tide went slowly out, 5 children clambered over slippery rocks, following a man who was up ahead. The children were Lisa, Sky Marie and Alinga Fitzgerald of Fellowship Farm, and their cousins Nick and Anissa, who were visiting for 2 weeks from Sydney. Together with Dr. and Mr. Fitzgerald, the 5 children were camping for a few days at a beach near the farm. The man they were following along the rocks out to the point was Lisa, Sky and Alinga's dad, Flip. His real name was George, but everyone called him Flip. That morning, the Fitzgerald children had been swimming with their mother in the sea when she had mysteriously disappeared. The children hoped that their dad was going to lead them to find her. Anissa and Alinga were only 6, and some of the rocks were very big and very slippery, so the children moved slowly and carefully. Sky, who was 8, Lisa, who was 10, and Nick, who was 11, took good care of Anissa and Alinga and helped them over the biggest rocks. As they clambered along, they heard a voice call, "Hoo-woo!" They looked up. Out on the point ahead stood Romy, Lisa, Sky and Alinga's mum, Nick and Anissa's auntie. She was in her green swimsuit and waving. The children waved back and hurried along the rocks as fast as possible without anyone getting hurt. Within a few minutes, they had arrived at where Romy had been standing when she waved, but she was nowhere to be seen. The children looked out to sea. She hadn't got back in the water. They looked around the point at the rocks that stretched along the cliff bottom. She wasn't there. Only Flip was there, looking puzzled. Or pretending to look puzzled. "Where did Mummy go?" asked Sky, helping Anissa over one last rock. Flip raised his eyebrows and gave his shoulders a big shrug, as if to say, "I have no idea." The children started calling, "Mum! Mummy! Aunt Romy! Auntie! Where are you?" Flip stood on a rock looking at the sea. On one side of the rocks was the sea. On the other side was a sheer cliff. No one could possibly climb it. It went straight up. On top of the cliff, there were grass and trees and big boulders, but the cliff top was high above the rocks. The only way to get there was to go back along the rocks to the beach, up the sandy trail from the beach, past the campsite and out onto the point. Suddenly, the children heard a voice. "Hoo-woo!" The voice was coming from on top of the cliff. They all looked up. There, on top of the cliff, was Romy in her green swimsuit. She waved and smiled and beckoned them to join her. "How did you get up there?" called Lisa. The breeze coming in from the sea carried her words away. But Romy wouldn't have heard them anyway. By the time Lisa had spoken, Romy had disappeared again. Chapter 2, A Secret Cave. The children were very confused. One minute, Romy had been standing on the rocks at the bottom of the cliff. The next minute, she was at the top of the cliff. And now she had disappeared again. Flip continued to look out to sea. His face looked very worried. He put his hand on his forehead to block the sun as if to help him see better. "Uncle Flip," said Nick. "We found Aunt Romy. She's not out at sea." "You found her? Where?" said Uncle Flip excitedly. Lisa and Sky and Alinga knew their dad well enough to know that he was playing. "On the cliff top," said Nick. "Oh, thank goodness," said Flip. "I thought she was lost at sea." He looked up at the cliff. "But where is she, Nick?" Flip asked with a look of worry appearing on his face again. They all looked up at the cliff top again. No one could see any sign of her. Suddenly, they heard Romy's voice. "Hoo-woo!" And there she was, standing on the rocks at the bottom of the cliff again. Alinga scrambled over the rocks to Romy. He wrapped his arms around her waist. "Please don't disappear again," he begged, giving her a big hug. Romy hugged him back. "I won't, my darling," she promised. "How did you get on the top of the cliff?" asked Anissa. "Did you use magic?" Anissa couldn't think of any other way. "Sort of," smiled Auntie Romy. She beckoned all the children to come closer. When they had all gathered around, she said in a low, serious voice, "I found a secret tunnel." "A secret tunnel?" said the children. "Where?" "Follow me," said Romy with a wink. Right at the bottom of the cliff were two very big boulders. Trees and shrubs grew out of the cliff and around the rocks there. But where the two rocks touched, there was a triangular hole, just big enough for a grown-up to crawl through. Romy led the children to the hole. Then she got down on her hands and knees and crawled between the rocks at the bottom of the cliff. Her whole body disappeared inside. The children followed one after the other. What they found inside the hole amazed them. On the other side of the hole was a cave inside the cliff. It had a sandy bottom and dirt walls. There were some plants growing along the damp walls. The cave had light coming from the hole that they had come through. But there was also light coming from a hole high up near the back of the cave. Romy took the children to the back of the cave. There was a rough path leading steeply up. Romy climbed carefully up the path made of rocks and dirt and tree roots. The children followed behind. Alinga and Anissa went first, then Nick and Sky. Lisa came behind them all. They climbed up and up until at last they came through a small hole at the top and found themselves on top of the cliff. The hole was mostly covered by a prickly bush, and no one would notice if they were walking along the cliff and didn't know it was there. As Lisa came out of the hole to the cliff top, the children started to chatter excitedly. "A secret cave!" they said. "And a secret tunnel! What a discovery!" After they had talked for a while, Romy suggested they climb back down to the cave and head back to the campsite for some lunch. They could come back and play in the secret cave later in the afternoon. Romy went first and helped the littler children down the steep rocky path. The older children followed. When they crawled through the hole between the rocks at the bottom of the cliff, they found Flip staring out to sea. "Oh, thank goodness you're safe," he said with a wink. "I thought I'd lost you all at sea." "We weren't lost, Uncle Flip," said Anissa. "Aunt Romy found a secret cave and a secret tunnel." "Wow," said Flip with wide eyes. "Tell me all about it as we go back to camp." Chapter 3, Punches and Plans. Back at the campsite, the puppies were wild with excitement to see their carers come back. They had been very, very unhappy at missing the action, tied up at the campsite. Sky untied them and they ran in crazy circles, chasing the children, each other, and their own tails. Romy slipped into her tent to get changed out of her swimsuit. Flip got the fire going to boil the billy for tea. In an esky was a big plastic container of vegetable soup and a big packet of chicken drumsticks. Lisa thought it would be better to have soup for lunch and barbecue the chicken in the evening. She poured the soup into the camp pot and put it on the metal grid over the fire to heat up. Then she got some water for all the children to drink. Nick and Sky made some sandwiches and cut up some fruit. Anissa and Alinga poured some water into the puppies' dish and gave them some dog pellets to eat. Soon lunch was ready and the family began to eat. The puppies, with full tummies, settled down for a nap in some scrub under the she-oak tree. Flea rested her head on Flex's tummy, who rested his head against Fizz's back. They closed their little eyes and dropped off to sleep. Every now and then, their eyes would flash open and they would snap at a fly bothering them, and then drop back off to sleep. Conversation quickly turned to the mysterious tunnel they had just discovered. "Maybe we are the very first people to ever discover that tunnel," said Lisa as she drank her soup. "Or maybe," said Alinga, "maybe we're not the first at all. Maybe it's a tunnel that used to be used by pirates." Little bits of bread, tomato, and cheese came flying out of Alinga's mouth as he said pirates. "Yuck," said Sky, wiping some chewed-up cheese off her arm. "Yes, Ollie," said Alinga, looking wide-eyed at her cousin. "Maybe the pirates used to store their treasure in there, or keep prisoners there." "If they did, they mustn't have had any fat pirates or fat prisoners," joked Nick. "The holes on both ends are pretty small." The children talked on about the tunnel and what they planned to do with it now that they had discovered it. They promised never to tell anyone ever. It would be their secret hiding place. The children were keen to go back to the cave after lunch. Flip thought that it might be better to go back there tomorrow because it would be hard for the puppies to get over the rocks, and they had been tied up for part of the morning already. "How about this afternoon we go have a walk on the long beach and see if we can find some shells?" The children felt sorry for the puppies, and they thought Flip's idea was a fair one. After lunch, Sky and Anissa and Flea, Flex and Fizz went down to the small beach near the campsite to wash the dishes. When they got back, the family headed off along the track that took them to the other side of the point and down to the long beach. They couldn't even see the end of the beach. It seemed to stretch on forever. The puppies were thrilled to run and splash and play with the children as they went along the beach. While they went, the children collected shells. Romy and Flip walked hand in hand behind them, deep in conversation. Every now and then, one of them would laugh. Then they would continue to talk and walk along the beach. They seemed to be making important plans. Chapter 4: A Pirate Map? The next day, the children woke a little later than usual. They had had trouble getting to sleep because they were very excited about the secret tunnel. They talked late into the night about what it might have been used for and what games they could play in it. When they woke up, only Romy was at the campsite. "Good morning, Auntie," said Anissa, appearing from the children's tent. "Where's Uncle Flip?" "Good morning, doll," said Romy, looking up from her book. "Uncle's gone for a bit of a walk. He'll be back soon." By the time the children had had their spiritual breakfast, prayers, and their physical breakfast, toast and fruit, Uncle Flip was indeed back from his walk. He had black streaks on the back of his pants and some on his face too. Romy wiped them off his face for him. "Why have you got black marks on you, Daddy?" asked Sky. Just a grub, I guess, Daddy laughed. I must have caught grubbiness from some children that I know and love, he added, lifting Sky off her feet with his morning hug and rubbing his scratchy chin on her cheek. Daddy, ow! Laughed Sky, snuggling her head into his neck so he couldn't scratch her with his stubble. The children were very keen to get straight to the tunnel. Flip offered to stay on the beach with the puppies so they wouldn't have to be tied up at the campsite. As the children headed off over the rocks, Flip whistled and started to run along the beach to distract the puppies. They ran off after him, yapping and splashing. Romy went with the children, but she took her book so she could sit outside on the rocks and read while they played. After a few minutes of slipping and sliding over the rocks, the children arrived at the cave entrance. It was earlier in the day than when they were there yesterday, and the sea was higher on the rocks at the bottom of the cliff. The waves broke onto the rocks, sending up a light spray. Romy found a place to sit and read near the cliff bottom, away from the breaking waves. The children were chattering and jiggling with excitement as they all got down on their hands and knees on the damp rocks and crawled into the cave. Once inside the cave, they started to discuss the rules of the game and decide who was going to be the pirates and who was going to be the prisoners. Sky Marie and Nick were prisoners first. They were made to sit with their hands tied and their mouths gagged on a sandy patch near the cave entrance. Just as Lisa had finished tying them with the imaginary rope, Sky saw something. It was brown and rough-looking, about the size of a tissue. It was sticking out of the sand. Sky reached over and grabbed it. "Hey!" said Pirate Alinga. "You can't do that. Your hands are tied together, prisoner." Sky was looking at what she had pulled out of the sand. Look at this," said Sky, her eyes wide. "Hey, prisoner, you can't talk," said Pirate Alinga. "Your mouth is gagged." "It's a map!" The pirates and prisoners gathered around Sky. In her hand was a piece of tree bark. There were some symbols on it, written in charcoal. There was a square, and inside the square was a drawing of some bones. The square with the bones inside was next to two long squiggly lines. Just above the wiggly lines were 5 spiky lines joined together at the bottom. At the bottom of the map was the number 10,000, and next to the number was a picture of a foot. "A map?" cried Alinga. "It must have been left by the pirates! Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness!" The children looked at each other. They couldn't believe their eyes. What could it mean? Chapter 5, Buried Bones. Sky clutched the map and the children hurried out of the cave on their hands and knees. Anissa was the first one out. Aunt Romy, she called. "Come see what we found in the cave." Romy marked the page she was up to in her book and stood up. She dusted the sand and gravel from the seat of her pants and joined the children by the cave entrance. Sky held up the bark with the charcoal markings to show her mum. Romy's mouth fell open. She put her hand on her forehead. "What is it?" she asked. "It's a map! It's a map! A pirate's map!" cried Alinga, hopping up and down. "What does it mean?" Romy asked. Nobody knew. They decided to show Flip and get his help. As they started out over the rocks, Flip was at the far end of the beach. He saw them making their way back from the point and came jogging back along the beach with Flex, Flea and Fizz. When they all met up on the beach near the trail up to the campsite, the children hurried to show Flip their map. Flip looked at the map with a very serious face. He didn't understand the map either. He asked the children what they thought the symbols might mean. It was very puzzling. A square with bones inside next to 2 long wiggly lines with 5 spikes joined together at the bottom. Then, at the bottom of the map, the number 10,000 and a picture of a foot. They sat together thinking and consulting, and fighting off playful puppies. After a lot of discussion, the children thought they had worked part of it out. The square was a box. The bones were the bones of prisoners. The wiggly lines represented a river, and the 5 spikes at the top represented scrub. So there were bones buried next to a river where it was just coming out of the scrub and onto the beach. Nobody could guess what the number and the picture of the foot meant. "Maybe they buried 10,000 feet there," guessed Sky, laughing. "How awful," said Nick. "Let's go and find the bones buried next to the river and find out," said Sky. "Maybe there'll be treasure there as well." "Now, where is there a river coming out of the scrub?" asked Lisa. "There's that little creek at the end of the beach," said Anissa. "But it's not really a river." "But that must be it. It's right near the cave, and maybe it used to be bigger. You know, when the pirates drew the map." So it was decided. They were going to dig for a pirate gravesite near the creek off the small beach. Nick and Alinga ran up to the campsite to get the big shovel and other things with which to dig. Then they all hurried along the beach toward the creek. When they got there, they checked the map again. The square was on the left side of the wiggly lines near the spiky bunch of lines. So the box must be on the left side of the river, up near the scrub. They started digging, but they didn't get very far. On the left side of the river, just below the sand, was solid rock. "Maybe it's a different beach or a different river," suggested Anissa. "It can't be. This is the one nearest the cave. It must be this one." "Maybe the river's moved a bit. Maybe when they buried the bones, the river was flowing over there. So it used to be on the left, but now it's on the right," said Nick. It was all a bit confusing, but they decided to keep digging on the other side of the little creek. Chapter 6, The Search Continues. Alinga started digging with the big spade. The other children dug with cups and with their hands. The spade was almost as big as Alinga, so it was very hard for him to dig with it. Soon he passed it over to Lisa. After that, the children took it in turns to dig with the big spade. The children dug and dug. Their hole got bigger and bigger. Romy and Flip sat on the beach nearby. Romy was reading and Flip was dozing. He had risen very early that morning. After a while, Romy wandered over to where the children were working hard. "I honour all of you for your determination," she smiled, looking at their enormous hole. "Thanks, Mum," said Sky. "I'm thirsty," she added. The others were thirsty too. They decided to go back to the campsite for a drink and a snack. Alinga ran and dunked his head into the sea. He ran back up to where his daddy was dozing and shook his head. Big salty drops came flying off his shoulder-length hair and landed on Flip. Flip opened one sleepy eye and gave a low growl. Alinga knew what was coming next, and he ran shrieking and laughing off down the beach. Flip leaped up, pretended to turn into a big grizzly bear, and went galloping after his son. He quickly caught up with Alinga, rolled him in the sand, and tickled him until Alinga begged for mercy. The rest of the family walked slowly along the beach. They felt disappointed that they had not found anything after all that digging. As they walked, they talked about the map. They started to wonder if they had made a mistake. Maybe Anissa was right when she suggested they look for a different creek at a different beach. Just then, Sky had a flash of insight. She grabbed her sister's arm. "I've got it! I've got it!" "What?" said Lisa. "The map! The foot means foot." "No kidding, Sky," said Lisa, wondering if her sister was delirious from dehydration. Sky went on. "We have to go 10,000 feet. You know, like 3 feet in a meter. So we have to go about 3,000 meters, 3 kilometers. We need to go to a river coming out of the scrub that's 3 kilometers away." At first, it seemed a wacky idea, but after a bit of discussion, everyone agreed that it might be the right understanding. When they got back to the campsite, they shared the thought with Flip and Alinga. Straight away, Flip said, "I bet that's it. I think we're onto something now." While they drank water and ate oranges, they kept talking about the map. The only beach they knew that was long enough nearby was the very long beach on the other side of the point. It seemed like that must be the one. After staying awake all night and digging all morning, nobody felt much like walking for 6 kilometers. 3 kilometers there and 3 kilometers back. Luckily, Flip had an idea. "If we go now, it will be low tide. We can drive the ute along the beach. The long beach has very hard sand, so we shouldn't have any problems." Everyone agreed it was a very good idea. When they had finished their snack, they took the esky and some of the other supplies out of the back of the ute and put them in the children's tent. Then they put the spade and the other digging tools into the back of the ute. The children climbed onto the back and held onto the rail. Sky and Lisa helped the puppies on board. They had to be tied to the rail on short leashes so that they didn't do anything silly and fall off the ute while it was moving. Flip started the engine and drove down the sandy trail to the long beach. The tide was indeed low, and soon the ute was cruising along the hard sand. The salty wind whistled in the children's ears. They hoped that now they would find the pirates' treasure, or at least something interesting. Chapter 7: A Treasure Map. The family had been driving for almost 3 kilometers along the beach when Flip brought the ute to a gentle stop. There was a river. It was a solid flow of water coming through the dunes and scrub and down the beach to the sea. The children untied the puppies and they all jumped off the ute and onto the hard sand. Sky grabbed the spade and Anissa brought the cups for digging. Then they all wandered up the side of the river towards the scrubby grass which was growing at the top of the beach. What they saw there made them stop in their tracks. There was a large wooden stake driven into the sand. Attached to it by a rusty old nail was a piece of tree bark like the one Sky had found in the cave. On the smooth side of the bark was a drawing done in charcoal. It was a picture of a skull and crossbones. "Oh my goodness!" exclaimed Alinga. "Look, it's the pirate's flag! This must be the spot!" Alinga grabbed hold of his cousin Anissa and jumped with excitement. Tingles went down everyone's spine. Now that they had really found the spot to dig, they also felt a bit scared of what they might find. "Come on," said Sky bravely. "Let's dig." Lisa took the spade and started digging. Sky helped with the cups, and slowly the others also joined in. This time they didn't have to dig long at all. After only a few minutes, Lisa felt something clicking against the spade. She stopped digging. The children looked at each other, afraid of what they might be about to find. Lisa put the spade down and they all started digging gently with their hands. They found that the thing that had clinked against the spade was a layer of stones. They removed the stones. Underneath the stones was a layer of leaves and branches. They removed them to find a box. It looked like it was made out of driftwood hammered hastily together. Together they pulled the box out of the hole. One of the pieces of wood was not hammered on. It was just sitting on top. The children looked at each other. Who would be the one to take the lid off? At last, Alinga's little hand reached out and slowly took the lid off the box. The children looked inside and gasped. Inside the box was a pile of bones. It was true that the bones looked quite small, and they did look quite a lot like chicken bones, but they were still bones. "Their prisoner must have been a child," said Lisa. Everyone got goosebumps. Lisa looked into the box for a second time. It was then that she noticed there was something else in the box with the bones. She stuck her hand cautiously into the box. "Lisa," said the others, "don't touch the bones!" But Lisa wasn't touching the bones. She wrapped her fingers around something rough on one side, smooth on the other, and pulled it out. Everyone was very surprised. There was another piece of tree bark and a drawing done in charcoal. It was another map. This map was very clear. It showed the sea and some rocks. Behind the rocks, there was a drawing of a small hole leading to a cave. In the right-hand corner of the cave was a big black X. On the top of the map, there was one word. It said treasure.
Tresha.
That word must mean treasure. I guess the pirates weren't good spellers, laughed Nick. Yes, and this map is telling us to go back to the secret cave, said Lisa. Everyone agreed that that was where they needed to go next. Chapter 8, The Race Against Time. The children called excitedly to Flip. Flip was down at the water's edge watching the crabs scuttle about as the tide came in and covered their holes. He came back up the beach to see what they had discovered. They told him about the flag, the rocks, the branches, the box made of driftwood, and the child's bones inside. Then they told him about the treasure map. "We need to go back to the cave," said Alinga. "Wow, treasure," said Flip. "Come on, everybody, jump on." Everyone scrambled to get onto the ute. They tied up the puppies and Flip revved the engine. He turned the ute around to go back along the beach. All the children had drunk a lot of water before they left for the long beach. As they started driving back, Alinga's bladder started to feel very full. He banged on the roof of the ute, which was the sign the children used to tell their dad to stop. Flip stopped the ute. Alinga swung his body around the side of the ute to his dad's window. "Daddy, I need to do a wheeze. Can you just wait for a minute?" Flip nodded. Alinga slid carefully down off the back of the ute and trotted up the beach. He went over the hump of sand at the top of the beach and disappeared for a minute. Then he came running back down to the beach and jumped on. "Okay, Dad," he called when he was holding onto the rail again. Flip started the engine and pushed on the accelerator. But the car didn't move forward. The wheels just went round and round in one spot. Flip stepped out of the ute and looked at the wheels. "Oh no," said Flip. He must have stopped where the sand was softer. And while they waited for Alinga, the ute had sunk into the sand. "We're bogged!" Flip looked down the beach to the sea and the slowly rising tide. Flip had to think quickly to get the ute out of the sand before the sea reached it. "Alrighty, action stations," he said. The children jumped off the ute. "We need driftwood," said Flip. Luckily, there was lots of driftwood about. Flip and the children gathered armloads of the flatter, wider bits of wood and brought them down to the ute. Flip dug away at the sand in front of one wheel and shoved some wood under it. He made a little ramp with some of the other bits of wood. He had to make sure he did it right the first time. Otherwise, the ute could sink further into the sand. When Flip had dug away the sand and placed the wood in front of one wheel, he stood up and looked anxiously at the sea. There was still time, but not much. He moved to another wheel and dug. His strong arms pulled the sand out from under the car and away from the front of the tire. The children handed him the wood and he shoved it hard into place. Flip was sweating and covered in sand. He took off his shirt and moved to the third tire. The children stood silently beside the car, hoping and praying that they would beat the sea. Flip moved quickly to the fourth tire. When it was done, he put the rest of the wood on the sand under the car. Then he stood still for a minute to say a prayer with the children. When they had finished the prayer, Flip told the children to stand well back from the ute. He started the engine, put it into first gear and revved the accelerator. The ute edged onto the wood and moved forward. Flip drove quickly on away from the soft sand. The children cheered and ran after the ute. Flip stopped for a moment while the children climbed on. Then they drove off along the beach with Flip honking happily on the horn. Chapter 9: An Accident at the Cave. When they arrived back at the campsite, Romy had lunch ready. The children filled her in on their latest adventures. They didn't want to stop for lunch, even though they were very hungry. They wanted to go straight to the cave and look for the treasure. "I think we need to use our patience here," said Romy. "If we don't eat, we'll get tired, and that's when accidents start happening. Let's have some lunch and then go look for the treasure. I'm sure it will still be there after lunch." The children really didn't want to stop now that they were so close to finding treasure. But they nodded and went to wash their hands. "Thank you very much for your obedience," called Romy after the children. When they started eating, the children were glad they had stopped for lunch. They munched hungrily on their cheese and tomato sandwiches with bananas for dessert. They had bought the bananas at the market, which was quite a few days ago, so some of them were getting too ripe to eat. Romy used a fork to mash them up and added some milk to make a kind of banana milkshake. Lisa thought it was disgusting. Nick and Anissa had a little bit, but they didn't like it much either. But Sky and Alinga loved it. After lunch, Flip offered to wash up. Romy accompanied the children along the rocks to the entrance of the secret cave. The puppies were very keen to follow the children, but the rocks were too big and too slippery for fat little puppies on short legs. In the end, they settled for helping Flip wash up at the edge of the sea. Lisa held the map carefully so that the charcoal wouldn't get smudged as she climbed up and down the rocks. Soon the children reached the cave entrance. They dropped down to their hands and knees to go through. Everyone was very excited. Sky was a little bit too excited. As she hurried to go through the cave entrance, she didn't duck her head enough. As she crawled forward, Sky cracked her head against a sharp rock poking down in the entrance. She cried out in pain and clutched her head. Romy hurried over the last few rocks to Sky. Sky crawled slowly backwards away from the cave. Blood was trickling down her forehead. As it dripped into her eye, she got a fright and started to cry. The other children came quickly back out of the cave. "Take off your t-shirt, please, Ollie," Romy said to her son. Romy folded the t-shirt into a wad of material and held it to Sky's head. She wiped away the blood, folded the shirt over, and held the cloth to the cut again. The bleeding stopped quite quickly. A bruise and a bump appeared on Sky's forehead, but she started to feel better. "Okay," said Sky with a brave smile. "Let's go find treasure." "Okay," said Lisa. "You go first, sister. Slowly, slowly." Sky led the way into the cave, and the others followed after her. When they were inside, Lisa held the map so that everyone could see. The drawing showed an X in the back right-hand corner of the cave. The children walked slowly over to the back right-hand corner. To their astonishment, in the corner behind a rock was an X. It had been drawn in the soft sand of the cave floor. The children started digging with their hands in the soft sand where the X was. At first, it seemed like there was just the rock floor under the soft sand. But then, Anissa felt something. She grabbed hold of it. It was small and rectangular. She pulled it out of the sand. The children's mouths dropped open. Their eyes opened wide. As soon as they saw it, they knew that they had found the secret treasure. And when they saw the secret treasure, they understood another secret too. Chapter 10: The Pirate's Secret. Sitting outside the cave, Romy heard digging, then crackling, then silence, then laughter. She knew that they had found the treasure. One by one, the children came crawling out of the cave. Anissa clutched the treasure. "Have you seen any pirates around here by any chance?" Lisa asked her mum with a big grin. "Yes," said Romy, nodding. "There's one over there," she pointed. The children looked up to where she was pointing. They saw Flip washing dishes at the seashore. "I thought as much," said Lisa. The children clambered back over the rocks to the small beach. "Hello, Pirate Flip," they called. "Would you like some of our treasure?" "Yes, please," said Flip. "What flavour is your treasure?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. "Chocolate biscuit flavoured," said Anissa, holding up the treasure, a packet of Tim Tams. "My favourite flavour and treasure," said Flip, taking the clean plates from the rock and standing up. They took the Tim Tams up to the campsite and warmed some milk in the billy. While they sipped their warm milk and ate chocolate biscuits, the children had some questions for Pirate Flip. Flip explained that the night before, he had saved the chicken bones from their dinner. Then he had got up very early that morning. He found some bark and drew the maps and the flag on it using charcoal from the fire. Then he took the biscuits and the first map down to the cave. He buried the biscuits in the back of the cave and left the first map sticking out in a place where someone would be sure to find it. Then, using his hammer and nails from under the seat in the ute, he made a box out of driftwood. He put the leftover chicken bones inside and added the second map. Just as the sun was coming up, he took them along to the river on the long beach and buried them. He stuck the piece of wood in the sand with the flag on top so that the children would be sure to dig in the right spot. Then he buried the box with the bones and the map and covered them with leaves and rocks and sand. He had just come back to the campsite when the children woke up, and that was why he still had charcoal on his pants and on his face. The children thought Flip was a very good pirate, and they were very happy with their treasure. They were very glad to hear it was chicken bones in the box and not a pirate's prisoner after all. That afternoon, the children went along to the secret cave to play. "Let's not be pirates and prisoners," suggested Anissa. "Let's pretend we have been shipwrecked and we washed up on this island and this cave is our new home." Everyone agreed that it was a much better game. They gathered little rocks and shells and leaves to decorate their new home and started to play.